everyone, and welcome to the panel, It Takes Two to Tango, Why the Future of Financial Services Depends on Cooperation, Not Just Competition, brought to you by Fintechs Canada. I'm Kelly Sullivan, Director of Member Engagement at the Association and your moderator today. Partnerships between fintechs and banks have been gaining popularity recently. In this panel, we hear from both sides, fintechs and financial institutions, about what makes a partnership successful and why cooperation is the key to the future of financial services in Canada. Before we start, I'll give each of you about a minute to introduce yourselves, your company, and explain your value proposition to our audience. Phil, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Philippe. I am the head of public affairs and policy at Flinks, and Flinks is a leading data aggregator in Canada. So we are representing the fintech side.
Thanks, Phil. And Ivy?
So hi, everyone. I'm Ivy. I head the product and design team at a fintech called NanoPay, located in Toronto, Canada. I'll give a quick blurb on myself, I guess, and then a bit on NanoPay. So starting with myself, I've been in payments for about a little bit over 20 years. I started off in the merchant acquiring, credit card processing side at Monaris, was there for a decade, then went to Citibank in treasury and trade, focusing on large corporates, Fortune 500 companies, specializing in liquidity and cash management solutions. And then I decided to make a pivot into the fintech space at a payments tech company called NanoPay, and I've been there for about 4 years now. So I've basically, my background, I'd say I've been fortunate enough to have experience working at a multinational bank, and then also like with over 200,000 employees, and also at a small fintech with under 60 employees. So I can kind of see both sides of the coin. And then just lastly, a little bit about NanoPay. I think our key value prop is, we have over 300 microservices. I like to describe the microservices of our platform like Lego block concepts. So we have different features that you can piece together. And although the solutions are the same foundation, every outcome or output for every client can be very different and unique and customized. And then we essentially have a framework that reduces boilerplate or repetitive code. So it helps us get to speed to market very quickly.
Great, thanks, Ivy. Let's make a switch then to our financial institution panelists. Emma?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma Kestner-Weaver. I am a managing director at ATB Financial on our payments team. I oversee all of our back-end support for the credit and debit card space related to our systems, process, risks, analytics, and vendor management. ATB overall is a very unique space. We are a regional institution that competes not only with the big five, but the fintechs. So we're in that sweet spot to be that collaborative space in order to be able to support fintech's growth.
Great, thanks, Emma. And Eliza, let's end with you.
Hi, my name's Eliza LeBlanc, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Digital Commerce Bank. I've been here for the last 6 months, but I've been in banking for 15 plus years. My last role previous to here was head of a challenger bank. Digital Commerce Bank provides banking as a service as well as a leader in payment service provider. I guess we think of ourselves as a bit of a tech company with a banking license.
Great, thank you. So as I mentioned, partnerships between fintechs and banks have been gaining popularity recently. And while this number is growing, a fintech and bank partnership is still making headlines instead of being seen as the status quo. So for our fintech panelists, what has made you successful in securing partnerships with banks compared to some of the other fintechs? Is it your product, your approach, a combination? What was it that sealed the deal? Ivy, let's start with you.
I think the success of our deepest partnerships have actually been from existing relationships. Even our own team, our product team has had. And, within our team, I think we've worked with, so there's at least 3. We've had a large bank in Pakistan for partnering for a cross-border product. One of the big 5 banks in Canada doing business e-transfer solution, and we have a budding relationship with Citi. With all 3 of these bank partners on our product team, essentially, we've either worked at those companies before or had very strong relationships that we've worked with in the past. So I think really the key is having pre-established mutual, trust, good working relationships. That's the key. And I think that kind of we always want to make sure we don't burn our bridges and keep up good relationships as we go on to different areas of our careers. And you mentioned, I think your second question was whether or not it was a product or the approach that sealed the deal, right?
Yeah.
I think it's really a combination. All our products I mentioned are kind of customizable with the ability to white label. We're not offering a cookie cutter type solution. So it's really that whole Lego blocks analogy, being able to piece together the right fit and right solution for our customers. And then the approach is just, I think it's really important to listen and figure out what the gaps are between each other, where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, so we can find a kind of a good fit for that partnership.
That's great. And Phil, what about you?
I think I will give credit to our funders who we've been able to show, financial institution and other partners what's the value of open banking. Like, obviously, we cannot put the technology back in the box. Open banking is here to stay. And since the beginning, they've been advocating for, fintechs and banks to collaborate together and create this environment for a customer, for the benefit of the customer. So I think this is what allowed us to grow. This is their vision, that it was like Flinks will be a partner for banks and not necessarily like a mortal enemies. So again, I will think it's both the approach and the product that Flinks we're building, and the strategic partnership we have with national banks really allow us to, build directly while talking the language of FIs and partners and institutional investors. So we've been lucky to have a great partnership with national banks, but also we'll give credit to our funders since the beginning who have been advocating for a better cooperation between fintechs and banks.
Yeah, sometimes we forget, we're talking so much about technology and finances, but really it comes down to people. Let's make a switch over to our financial institutions. So thinking about your last partnership, or maybe your most successful partnership, what convinced you that this was the best approach for your bank?
I think for us, I think Ivy mentioned good relationships, good communications, long-term partnerships. I think that's really what we're looking for. And with that, when we're thinking about new ones or companies coming into the DC Bank ecosystem or partnering with us, what we're really looking for there is more the value prop. Do they know their market? Do they know really what they're going to add for value? And then how do we, partner with them to extend that value, provide the back end support that they need, or also partnering with what's a customized solution for them is their development between the teams and how do we work together. So again, that communication just super important, along with the relationships for that long-term success. I think the other thing that's always looked for is do they have their ducks in a row? So do they sort of understand compliance? Do they understand that there's regulations that have to be thought of? Are they ready to answer those questions on AML if needed? All of those pieces, understanding that you're coming into a very regulated environment. And so are they prepared?
I have to say, I'm always really impressed when I interact with fintechs and how compliance is always top of mind. So clearly they're listening and focusing on that AML, KYC, ATF, all the acronyms are very important to our fintech partners. Emma, what about at ATB?
So to partner with a group that has the same entrepreneurial mindset that aligns with ATB is really where we're looking for the most success. ATB is in that space where we have competition on all fronts, especially being a regional institution. So we need to find other streams of revenue that align with growth objectives and not in direct competition with net new clients or account management. So if we can create those partnerships and have the ability to engage in a national forum, that's a great opportunity for us.
Great, thanks. So everyone here has had multiple partnerships. You've had multiple examples to draw upon. So clearly something is working. What have some of the benefits you've seen from your partnerships that make it a lucrative endeavor? Maybe this time we can do fintech bank. Phil, let's start with you.
Yeah, so basically the first or biggest benefit from National Bank is been, to see how a financial institution thinks and act and prepare. So having really to speak the language. So when you are like a 120 person startup, for example, you operate different than when you are a big financial institution. So to really understand the culture and what's on the other side of the veil, so that really help us. and also to have access about, with a relationship with National Bank, we create Outbound, which is a product that is tailor-made and fit for purpose and fit for market directly for the banks. So having a partner like that who is able to tell us what are their needs instead of trying to figure out and pitch whatever you have, it was really interesting. And so the biggest benefit I will say was first understanding their culture, but also having access to, the back end and see how it works within. So these are the two most important benefits in my opinion.
A great start to a bunch of future partnerships. Emma, what about at ATB?
We haven't necessarily experienced a lot of cultural differences, but rather implementation methodology differences. ATB doesn't have the same layers as other FIs, but we still have a number of layers and expectations of regulators and networks that we need to fulfill. So we need to make sure that our partners are abiding by them all and following all those great policies that are established so that we can mitigate risk and create that great client experience.
Ivy, what about you? What are some of the benefits that you've seen from your partnerships?
I think the benefits, at least for us, have been transformational. We're a tech company at heart. We do have MSB licenses in Canada, but it's not our strategy to spend enormous amounts of effort, money, and time to get licenses in all the corridors. So we leverage our bank partners to move the money overseas, for example, so we can focus on the product and the user experience. Obviously, the business model is a huge factor for us. A great partnership has a model that works for both of us where we can generate more revenue and scale that wouldn't have been possible without each other. So as a fintech, obviously partnering with bigger companies and banks help us scale to the one-to-many approach. So we get much more customers, and that would be extremely, obviously, very beneficial for us as a small company.
That's great. And yeah, the theme is definitely partnership, and that's what financial institutions and banks have been doing. It's not service providers or clients maybe that has been traditionally the model. So it's great to hear that you're seeing benefits on both sides. Elisa, do you want to close us out on what are the benefits that DC sees?
Sure. Well, the most obvious benefit for us is we provide banking as a service and payments as a service provider. So for, fintechs that are looking to get into the banking ecosystem, we're one of the few ways to actually sort of get on there. And the big benefit for us is that as they sort of grow and they grow their value props and they grow their customer base, we also grow, which allows us to offer more innovative solutions across. And then I think on the softer side, because we are really connected into this fintech community, and we see ourselves as that tech company as well, it keeps us innovative, it keeps us learning, and it keeps us connected. So it's a really core for who we are.
So a few of you have mentioned culture and the connection and seeing yourselves as maybe more payment company, more bank. And when we think about banks and fintechs, the culture is often, it seems like on other sides of the world, let alone on other side of the room. So for our fintech panelists, for many, that culture of innovation and moving fast and breaking things is really considered sacrosanct. So does having additional resources when you're partnering with FIs, does that allow you to do more? Do you feel that that partnership has constrained your innovation at all? Ivy, why don't we start with you?
Again, I would say both. So generally, the partnerships have enabled us to do things we couldn't, right? So for example, again, solving money movement in certain corridors, like I mentioned earlier, it's also enabled us to add different features and capabilities into our product by integrating with other products and services, which makes it overall a more stronger holistic solution. So there's definitely, I think, a lot of benefits in that. I would say, though, on the opposite side, with traditional banks, which we have partnered with as well, compliance sometimes isn't always comfortable or used to certain use cases. So as part of NanoPay's history, we previously partnered with a large investment bank. And through the partnership, ultimately, there was also an investment there as well. But it ended up red taping us from entering specific corridors and focusing on certain use cases. It ended up costing us actually a lot of money in that scenario, and in the end, we ended up parting ways. But that's one example, just to give kind of a different angle on things. But overall, I would say extremely beneficial. It's moved us forward rather than constrained us.
Yeah, not everything can be, sunshine and rainbows all the time. Sometimes there's a bit of difference there. And just on that point, you said that you had to part ways, but you've obviously continued to prioritize partnerships. Has that changed your approach at all, or the different partners that you reach out to? How did that experience shape your next steps?
Yeah, it definitely makes us think of the type of partners we want to partner with, right? And now that we've gone through that experience, we come in with our eyes wide open. There are certain banks that you can tell off the bat have a more aligned appetite, and those are the partners that we kind of continue to try to work towards having a partnership. Ones where, from an appetite perspective, there's a difference, right? And it's not as aligned. Those are the partnerships that we recognize right away as potentially not being able to move forward, at least with those use cases, but we try to find other opportunities that we could partner with better. So just knowing that up front now, we kind of walk in there with the eyes wide open, assess the partners, make sure that there's an alignment there and that it's a good fit. Not every single one's going to fit well, right? Especially when we have prior existing relationships, we try to make things fit, but sometimes that might not be the use case. And maybe something else comes along later on that would be a better fit.
Yeah. And back to your first response, not to burn the bridge. Just because it doesn't work out doesn't mean you can't do something in the future. That's
Exactly.
really interesting. Phil, what about you?
Yeah, a little bit like Ivy. I think it's highly beneficial to have, to partner with financial institutions of all size. I think it's really enriching experiences. I will say that my biggest advice will be to, it help us focus, like avoid innovation for innovation shakes, but at least develop products that the market wants and that FI wants. So if your clients are, fintech or FIs, how else you have to be more focused and just know in every direction and try to sell something that it's not ready for market yet or doesn't, fit a particular purpose. So obviously, like you have to adapt to this difference in the culture. I think it's important, but I think, like fintechs would love to be more like banks. I think banks would like to be more like startup and be, super agile and all. So I think it's a mutual benefits. And the key here is always to communicate expectations and manage expectations with the right person. But again, really to focus on a product that is fit for purpose and ready for market.
That's great. Everyone can kind of meet in the middle. Everyone can improve on both sides. Switching to the FIs, same sort of question. Have you experienced any of those cultural differences when working with fintechs? If yes, how did you manage that integration successfully? And did you find it, beneficial, like Phil has mentioned, or has it been a struggle in some cases? Elisa, why don't we start with you?
Sure. For Digital Commerce Bank, maybe not so much on the cultural side. Like I think as we're trying to be innovative and we're fairly adaptable ourselves, and looking at, partnering on those customized solutions, I don't think culture's been as big as a hurdle as maybe it would have been in the past. I think if there has been any place, maybe to Phil's point, it's maybe focus, right? So, when you're building those partnerships and they're not quite focused, then there's a lot of churn. And with that churn, right, like there's a lot of time and energy that can go into those. So I don't know if that's a cultural issue, or maybe it's just a stage of development, right? Like, so banks are also fairly established. And with that comes, they sort of know their processes and procedures, and they know their clients and, what they have to offer. Whereas if you're a new fintech, sometimes you're still developing that and learning yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point. In order to be a bank, you have to be established. There's no real way around it. So yeah, maybe it's less about the cultural differences than point of maturity.
Yes.
Emma, anything to add?
No, I was just going to say that it's really important in the upfront conversations to establish those cadences and those processes right off the hop so that both sides know and have an overview and understanding of what the expectations are. And so that it's not you go 6 months down the line and having to kind of revert back or have, some difficult conversations. So all that upfront expectation setting is really important.
I think what I'm hearing from both the fintech and financial institutions is perhaps this cultural difference is more perceived than actual. And that this idea that fintechs and banks can't work together is maybe an outdated approach. And especially, Abby, you mentioned at the beginning, a lot of people have worked in a lot of these different places. So maybe not as big of a hurdle as some fintechs or banks may have expected going into a potential partnership. So thinking less now about your individual experiences and more about your views of the ecosystem, because all of you have quite extensive experience in the space. Many Canadian fintechs have really struggled to get a foothold in Canada for a variety of reasons, but partnerships and regulatory environment are definitely up there in what's limiting Canadian fintech. So in your view, what is the role of banks and fintechs to foster this collaboration and cooperation for the benefit of an innovative Canada? Phil, let's start with you.
Yeah, so for franchise institution, I will say to start embracing open banking. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you can put the technology back in the bucket. It's something that customers want. So instead of trying to fight it, just embrace it and try to partners and look for relevant partnerships in the fintech ecosystem. I think it's going to be a first mover advantage for financial institutions who dare to look around and try to innovate and participate with fintechs. And for the fintechs, I will say it's stop saying that we want to disrupt the financial system, because that's not true. I don't think nobody can benefit from that, and it will not convince anybody, will that be regulators or customers, that disrupting the financial market is a good idea. So I will say to try to meet in the middle, and for FIs to say, yeah, there's good fintech out there who are doing their homework, who want to comply, want to participate, and can help grow our business and review how we do our business. And for fintechs, it's like stop seeing banks as mortals and try to embrace more the financial ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, because as we've seen today, there are some great people at banks. They're not all bad, right? Emma, what about you? And again, not from ATB's perspective necessarily, but just sort of in general, what do you think that responsibility is?
I think that you have to establish a really good program agreement or overall agreement between the two, for more so sharing lessons learned versus, trying to kind of have that parent-child relationship. Is more of an equal relationship in which the lessons can be shared and learn from them and be able to grow instead of stifling, and really encouraging that innovation spirit while still managing to the risks.
I think it's come up a few times throughout the discussion that it really is a partnership now. And I like your parent-child analogy, because no fintech founder wants to feel like a little kid. So I think that is a great approach and viewpoint. Ivy, what about you? What are your thoughts on this responsibility or this future of cooperation?
I think regulation is a really important component of innovation, right? It can either drive innovation or it can discourage it. I think it's our job to educate regulators to keep them updated with advances in technology, the way the technologies apply different use cases. We can't expect them to just understand. So it is our job to try to explain it. I think that's how we can really work together to kind of drive past the hurdles and modernize ultimately payments in Canada.
That's great, because both or all of you have talked about, compliance and regulation. And if we can all work together with the government to agree upon it, it will make these partnerships much easier. Eliza, do you want to close us out here?
Sure. I'd probably just echo a little bit of what's already been said. With regulations or compliance or new pieces coming in, I think it's up to the players, both fintechs and banks, to actually partner together and then shepherd in those changes. Because as Phil said, we're not putting the toothpaste back in the tube, so it's coming. And as Ivy and Emma have said, partnerships and communication and working together is what will get us there. And I think it's not just getting us there, but we're getting there for sort of the Canadian population to get them more value for what they're able to get out of their financial services and their providers, and what they want to do and need to do day to day.
Yeah, and it's great to see our Fintechs Canada members really leading that charge in partnerships and also in regulatory advocacy. As we close out the panel, for both sides of the arrangement, what would you say is the number one piece of advice, since you are all pro-partnership, for anyone looking to secure and manage a successful partnership? What would your one takeaway be? Eliza, why don't we start with you, since we've been finishing with you a lot throughout?
Of course. I think the first thing would be communication and trust, right? So as long as you're starting your partnership, because that's what you really want it to be, with open communication and transparency, then you can get to your goals that much cleaner and that much quicker.
Ivy?
I think it's patience. So for all of our established partnerships, it's taken actually over a year to get things live and going. That's pretty much a standard now, is 1 year mark. It may sound like a very scary thing for a fintech to hear, but building out products together, forming these relationships, it takes time. Going through compliance takes time. So I think that's the one thing, is just especially from the fintech side, is bear patience in mind.
That's great. I think while the culture may be closer than we think between fintechs and bank, speed is maybe not quite so similar. So I think that's really great advice for all of our fintechs to keep in mind. Emma, what about you?
I echo that. It's also tempering expectations, right? So it's that patience, it's recognizing that there are certain processes that do need to be followed, but also, maybe it's a great opportunity to be challenging them. Does it make sense? And if we all gather together and show that and collaborate and itemize why it doesn't make sense, maybe having that one voice will move things faster. So tempering expectations, as Eliza said, open communications, and being able to gather together and create the uniformity, I think, would be my one takeaway from all of this.
Thanks. And Phil, you get the last word. What's your
Great.
advice?
I will say all of the above from what my colleague said, but also I would say to find a partnership that made sense, like on a culture and human basis level, if we get along with your partners, but also something that you have good synergy with, not just partnership for the sake of partnership. Otherwise, you're going to go nowhere. So really something that is business driven, that you have a partner that you trust, and that you can see, like, in the short, middle, and long run, continue to partner with. So just a partnership that makes sense overall.
That's great. Wise words to leave us on, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I'm sure everyone watching will find your comments as insightful as I did. For those watching, if you'd like to learn more about any of the companies featured here, you can find links to their websites on our website, fintechscanada.ca. Thank you again, everyone, and best of luck in your future partnerships.